Those protests have spread to half a dozen cities across Brazil, and they come at a time when the country is not only playing host to football's Confederation Cup, but also getting ready for next year's World Cup. And while those events have been welcomed by Brazilians as chances to enhance the nation's profile, many are now saying the raised expectations don't seem to have been matched by results. Earlier, I spoke to Eric Farnsworth, the Vice President of the Council of the Americas, and I asked him what prompted people to take to the streets.
I think it's pretty significant. This is not a country that normally takes to the streets at the drop of a hat, so you know that there is some frustration in the public at large. We don't want to overstate it because it's only been going on for a short period of time, and like the Occupy Wall Street movement in the United States, it's possible that this might peter out here in a few short months or certainly sooner, but we don't know. And initial indications are that, in fact, some of these demonstrations might actually intensify over the next few days, so we have to watch that closely. It's become now somewhat of a national protest of general frustration. What started with a frustration with high cost of bus fares is really amplified now into a general frustration over lack of services that the government is providing and the cost of living that's going up. And it's being promoted by both folks on the left of the political spectrum as well as folks on the right of the political spectrum, that perhaps don't care much for the current government. So it's a very important time, I think.
Eric, we've seen what's been going on in Turkey of late, and we've seen almost the government's response almost being fuel for the protests there. Is the Brazilian government taking any kind of lessons from that? Do you think they're going to have a more measured response, or how are they responding?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are responding in a much more measured way. In fact, the president of the country, Dilma Rousseff, has come out and said this is a democracy. People have the right to protest. And we've seen an increased security presence to make sure things don't get out of control. But in general, I think the police are allowing the demonstrators to go about their business. I think that the government's watching it closely, of course, but they have watched what's gone on in other countries as well. And I think they're very conscious about not overreacting.
Where does this leave the Confederation Cup opener on Saturday? All the sports fans want to know that answer.
Well, it's going to complicate traffic, no doubt, and getting to the stadium. I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing the protest now. Brazil is on the international stage. The attention of the world's media is on Brazil, and so it's a good time to show your displeasure, perhaps, at the government. But it's also really interesting that it's the Confederation's Cup that has brought some of this angst to the fore, because it's the building of these stadiums at the cost of many millions of dollars that's added fuel to the fire of people who say, well, some of that money should be spent on social programs, on improving services, on improving infrastructure, and instead we're building football stadiums, which really aren't going to benefit that many people over time. So it's a really interesting dynamic at work here, and I think the soccer tournament is really bringing that to the fore.
Well, then let's take one step further and talk about the 2014 World Cup. Is this a black eye for Brazil, and what does this say about that?
Well, I think that's still pretty far in the future. Certainly you have elections in Brazil coming up next year as well. So next year is going to be a very important time for Brazil. I wouldn't anticipate that there will be a direct link with the World Cup or certainly the Olympics in 2016. But that's something that remains to be seen. I think the government is going to have to take these demonstrations seriously, and they're going to have to find a way to address some of the concerns, either directly or indirectly. And if they do so, I think that it will be something that they can get beyond. But you can't assume success. You actually have to work for it, and I think that's what the government's going to have to do.